Hey everyone, so today we are going to be talking a little bit to start off our year by just going through what the discipline of history is. Okay, obviously I know that you guys have taken history classes before, but there may be new angles to what history actually is and is not if we are going to become professional historians this year, quote unquote, what we need to learn in order to know more about the discipline itself. So in terms of looking at history, this is something that, at its core, you guys probably already realize. So at its core, history encompasses the stories of humanity. You guys have talked a lot about the past within your past history classes, I'm sure. But history really sort of covers these significant milestones like wars, like revolutions, which we're going to be looking at in the first quarter here, and the rise and fall of empires, as well as everyday life. And that can include customs, traditions, personal experiences. And really, when we think about history, there's a lot of different types of historians, but there's also a lot of different branches that can sort of be looked at when we're trying to glean more information about what was important in the past. So the first thing is political history. So looking at political actions like the passing of laws or policies or how government runs. Social history, or how people lived on a day-to-day basis, regular people like you and me. Economic history, what did people do in order to make money or sell things or just survive? Cultural history, so how did the culture grow and change over time? And there's a lot of other different types of branches that are also a part of this thing we know as history. And so each of these branches examines different aspects of human life and contributes to a fuller understanding of the past. The more that we can sort of look at each grain within history, within each specific detail within history, the more that we know about it. The more we know about the past, what was important to the past, and how that sort of influences our understanding for today. And that really speaks to the essential quality of history. So for one, history allows us to learn from previous mistakes and successes, and it helps to inform our current decisions in the present and the future. Secondly, it fosters an appreciation for diverse cultures and perspectives because people in the past didn't always live how we live. And so this can help us to promote empathy and understanding among individuals and societies today and in the future as well. And then number three, history helps us construct our identities, and it provides context for who we are and where we came from. When we think about our own personal histories, oftentimes we think about, where did my family come from? What did they go through in order to get me to this place? And history can teach us a lot about those qualities. So in terms of someone who practices history or a historian, there's several things that they do that we may not have been privy to because we usually think of history just as these unchanging stories. But historians are individuals who specialize in the study of history. And so they become responsible for researching and analyzing and interpreting historical events and trends. And their work often begins with an examination of sources, which we are going to talk about in a little bit, and specifically primary sources, which are created by people who were actually at the events that they are studying. And so these can include things like letters, diaries, government records, photographs, artifacts. All of these things are things that historians would look at in order to gain more information about the past and to sort of create a history of these things. And so once they sort of gather these primary resources, they then critically evaluate them. And so this includes considering the context in which the sources were created, the perspectives of the author, potential biases, in order so they can sort of take the pros and cons of these particular sources and see whether they make credible sense when, balanced against the other evidence they might have found. But historians also consult secondary sources, which are created by people who are taking these primary sources and analyzing them themselves. So people who create secondary sources could be other historians. What have other historians said about this same topic that they are studying, the original historian is studying themselves? And so by synthesizing all of this information, by breaking down all of this information, by summarizing all of this information from both types of sources, historians can sort of construct a more comprehensive understanding. Because historians often focus on these specific themes or areas of interest, and so becoming really well versed in a narrow set of topics can oftentimes be the difference in terms of finding out much more about a given topic. Now, historians then take these sources and will discover historical knowledge through a couple different things as well. Not just the generalized primary sources or secondary sources, but also by starting off with a question, which is going to be at the crux of so much of what we do this year. We're going to be starting with a question or a hypothesis, and just like a scientist would, the historian then guides their investigation through this question and helps to narrow the focus of their research. And they end up finding more and more information through things like archival research. So visiting archives, of which in DC we have so many, even in Fairfax County, we have a lot of archives where they have compiled a lot of information from the past. Libraries and museums are also great for this sort of archival research, and they use these in order to access both primary and secondary sources. They could spend hours here sifting through different documents in order to find relevant information. They may also use fieldwork though, and this can involve visiting historical sites, conducting interviews, collecting data from the environment, all of which can help to add to our knowledge of historical research. So for instance, a huge thing right now, especially since so many Holocaust survivors have reached possibly the end of their life. I mean, many of them are coming up on 90 or 100 years old. To get interviews with people who had survived the Holocaust is of incredible work to historians so that we don't forget about such a troubled time in human history. And so getting these interviews, having this firsthand knowledge from people who were at these events and experienced these events firsthand is incredibly important. Another one is to collaborate. So collaborating with other scholars, including other historians, sharing insight and research and resources. And so this exchange of ideas can bring about new interpretations that maybe the historian we're talking about would not have had they not done it. And then also critical analysis. So sifting through and analyzing and interpreting their findings and the sources that they have is of incredible importance. And then lastly, peer review. So after you've written your paper or your book, having peers who can review it and see where you've gone right or wrong in terms of the methods that you used is also incredibly important. Now, along with the work of historians, one important concept that we want to think about when we're talking about history, and one that's going to come up quite often as we talk through the year, is an idea called historiography. And historiography is the study of how history is written and understood. And so historiography looks and examines the specific methods and perspectives that historians use to interpret historical events. Because contrary to popular belief, history does actually change. The past may not change, but history does change because our perspective on things change. And so how we view an event 20 years ago will be different than how we view that same event 20 years from now. because our perspectives as a society change. And so historiography is important because it reveals how interpretations of the past can change over time due to either new evidence or shifting societal values or evolving theories. And so historiography really looks at those methods in terms of how a history, not a past, a history is crafted. So a couple different approaches to historiography. One is to do traditional historiography, which often emphasizes political events, prominent figures, and it focuses on a narrative that highlights kings, wars, and treaties. Okay, this is what we usually think about when we think about history and how it's written. But you also have social history or social historiography. So social historians aim to understand the experiences of ordinary people and look at things like class and gender and race and culture. And that can shift over time. How we view certain things based on certain information may be different. Postmodern historiography, this challenges the idea of a single objective truth in history. And it suggests that all interpretations of history are based on the time period in which the historian who is crafting this history actually lived and their own context and biases. And then microhistories are where microhistorians, they focus on small events or individuals to explore larger historical themes and reveal the complexity of human experiences. Now, in terms of actually going out and starting the work of historians, we talked about how important sources are to history. And so one thing that you'll have to do throughout this class is to analyze sources. So the first thing that you want to do is to examine the actual source. So you're going to start by carefully observing the source itself and asking a couple questions like what type of source is it, who created it, when was it created, where was it created, and then you're going to contextualize the source. So you're going to place it in its appropriate time within history and understand it within its historical context. So what historical events were occurring at the time, what was the creators of the source's perspective on these things, and those can sort of help you to understand a little bit more about the historical background of that source. The third one here is to analyze the source then. Okay, you're going to dive deeper into the actual content of the source. So asking questions to yourself like, what is the main idea or argument that is trying to be made by this source? What evidence is provided? What language is used? And then finally, actually evaluating the source. So taking all of the information that you have and then evaluating it based on its content and context and just the basic understanding surrounding it. So is this source reliable? What biases are present? How does the source compare to others? And that can sort of determine how much you use the source within a given and what you take from the source in terms of its historical value. So in terms of taking this evaluation, again, you just want to be sure that you're thinking about what you're actually going to do with this analysis of sources. And so you're going to consider how this source contributes to your understanding of this particular historical event or period. And you can use it in order to develop arguments in essays or discussions, create connections to current events, engage in critical thinking, all of which are extremely important in terms of passing on historical knowledge and making historical points. So another thing here in terms of primary and secondary sources, which we mentioned earlier on. So primary sources are sources that are created at the original time of the event or around the original time. So they're from perspectives and people who are creating it that were directly involved or indirectly involved in the event in the time. So these can again include diaries or letters or photographs or official documents, artifacts. all of which can really influence our understanding of history. Secondary sources, though, are interpretations and analyses of primary sources or historical events created by individuals who did not experience the event firsthand. So this can include things like books or articles or textbooks or documentaries or biographies. All of these, sort of take into account a lot of the different primary sources they may have found in order to create or craft, I should say, a history of this particular time period. And so in terms of identifying whether something's a primary or secondary source, you can ask yourself when the source was created, who created the source, and then what is the purpose of this particular source. But you can also look at things like, what type of a source you have in your hands. If it's a document, image, artifact, oral history, it's most likely a primary source, especially if created by someone who's directly there. And then a secondary source, books, articles, documentaries. But of course, there are strengths and limitations to each of them, and this can really help you in terms of analyzing a particular source and looking at and evaluating the potential strengths, or advantages or limitations or disadvantages of that particular source. So in terms of primary sources, one of the strengths is that it's authentic, or it has greater potential authenticity. It provides direct access to historical events as they occurred, and it offers a genuine perspective. It also has unique insights. Someone who was actually there on that day may have more background information on things that we may not have thought about. They may know if they were in the American Civil War, they might know what Grant smelled like, and if General Ulysses S. Grant, who led the Union Army, smelled and no one wanted to be around him, well, that may influence how people wrote about U.S. Grant, and that may give us more information about what sort of leader he was, whatever small or big that might be based on his smell. And then there's also a variety of perspectives. Primary sources can represent diverse values and allow historians to capture a more comprehensive view of the past. However, there's a lot of limitations, several limitations of primary sources as well. The first one is bias. And so it may reflect the personal biases and perspectives of the creator. And that's going to influence the reliability. So if someone didn't like Ulysses S. Grant and said, I want to create a rumor that he smells, and that's why no one wants to be around him and why no one likes him, that can, severely impact our historical understanding of who U.S. Grant is. He may not have actually smelled. The next one, incomplete information. So they may not provide a full context and understanding of events, as they often focus on specific moments or viewpoints. If I'm in a specific point of the battle that wasn't the main point of the battle, I may not have information about what actually occurred. I may have heard about things secondhand myself. And then also accessibility. Some primary sources, because it's written in past language, it may be difficult to interpret. Now, that's it for primary sources. On the other hand, secondary sources, a couple strengths. For one, you can contextualize them. Secondary sources often place events within the broader historical context. They've also been analyzed, as the second point says, and provide interpretations and critiques of primary sources, and that can enhance our understanding. And they're also more accessible usually because they've been written closer to the present. And so they're in languages that we may be more able to understand. But the limitations for secondary sources, for one, there's a dependence on those primary sources, and so the reliability of secondary sources depends on the quality and accuracy of the primary sources they analyze and bring into whatever this particular project is. There's also potential for bias as well. The author of the secondary source may have their own biases, and that affects their interpretations and conclusions. If a biography of Ulysses S. Grant is written by their great-grandchild, well, then they're going to write it in a certain way that makes Ulysses S. Grant look good. Or if their grandfather, who would be the child of Ulysses S. Grant, didn't have a great relationship with General Grant, they may write it in a heavily negative way. You know, at the end of the day, we are all human and we do have these biases. And then third, there is a time lag. So secondary sources may take time for the to be written and published, and that can result in outdated information, especially when you have a very quickly evolving historical sources. Now, in terms of analyzing sources, there is a tool we're going to use, or a framework that we're going to use, that if you do IB down the road in junior and senior year for history, could come back up. And this is called OPCVL. And what OPCVL stands for is origin, purpose, content, or context, and value and limitation. And this is just a way to help us in terms of breaking down sources, to analyze sources deeper, whether they be primary or secondary. So first would be origin. So you're going to examine the origin of the source, who created it and when, and really understanding the context in which the source was produced can shed light on its reliability and perspective. The next one, purpose. Why did they create it? What messages or information was the creator trying to convey? And so this really helps us to understand potential biases as well. And then content or context, you're going to analyze the content of the source. What information does it provide? What key themes or ideas does it expose? Really analyzing it for the stuff that is actually on this particular source, and can lead to us understanding a little bit more about the historical context as well. And then the value, what unique insights does it offer? How does it contribute to our understanding of historical events? And it really helps us to highlight the significance of the source by doing this, and seeing whether it's essential to us using it, maybe essential or not essential at all. And then finally, limitation. So considering the limitations of the source. What are its weaknesses? How might biases or context affect its reliability? And so recognizing these limitations is really essential for helping us to have a balanced analysis. All right, well, that is it in terms of just going over some of the basic concepts we're going to be talking about. All of these are going to become essential to how we break down history, which is really how we're going to do it this year in terms of finding out more about these particular events throughout time and throughout the last 500 years for the purposes of our class. If you have any questions, please let me know. Other than that, have a great day.